Arsenal's biggest midfield risk is not a lack of quality, it is asking the same players to solve too many different problems. Rice has to protect, carry, press, recover, and still arrive in dangerous areas. Ødegaard has to control the rhythm, create, connect the attack, and still provide the final action. That is where Bruno Guimarães enters the case, not simply as another expensive midfielder, but as a player who could redistribute the entire workload. He could give Arsenal another route through pressure. He could allow Rice to attack more aggressively. He could stop every difficult midfield phase falling back onto the same two players. But there is a danger. At more than £80 million, Bruno cannot merely add quality. He has to solve the right problem. So today, we open the case file. Could Bruno Guimarães fix Arsenal's biggest midfield risk, or simply create a more expensive version of the same imbalance? That question, who does what, is the real midfield case. Because Arsenal already have elite midfielders, this is not a rescue mission. Rice is one of the most complete midfielders in Europe. Ødegaard remains Arsenal's main rhythm setter and creative connector. The problem is role overload. When Arsenal need control, Ødegaard drops deeper. When Arsenal need progression, Rice carries the ball. When Arsenal lose possession, Rice has to recover. When the attack stalls, Ødegaard has to create the final pass. And when Arsenal need another runner in the box, one of them is still expected to arrive. Each job makes sense on its own. The problem is what happens when the same players are asked to perform all of them in the same match. That creates dependence, not on one position, on two players carrying the whole midfield structure. Bruno could change that, but only if Arsenal define his role properly. Bruno's value is not simply that he can pass the ball. Arsenal already have passers. His value is that he can receive under pressure, turn away from contact, and keep the midfield moving. He can operate deeper, he can step forward, he can play through compact areas, and he brings aggression without needing the match to become chaotic. That matters because Arsenal's biggest midfield risk appears when the game becomes uncomfortable, when the press closes in, when the first passing lane disappears, when Rice has to collect the ball deeper than Arsenal want, when Ødegaard is forced away from the areas where he can influence the attack. Bruno could give Arsenal another escape route, another player opponents have to press, another midfielder capable of carrying the next phase, but that only becomes useful if his presence frees somebody else. Otherwise, Arsenal have spent more than £80 million to add another controller, without changing the workload. And this is where Declan Rice becomes central to the case, because Bruno would not merely join Rice, he could change what Arsenal asked Rice to do. Rice has shown he can protect space, carry through pressure, press aggressively, win duels, and arrive in dangerous areas. But the more build-up responsibility he carries, the harder it becomes to maximize everything else. If Bruno takes more responsibility in the first and second phases, Rice can start higher. He can attack loose balls, press closer to goal, make late runs, and use his power where opponents feel it most. That is the attraction. Not Bruno replacing Rice, Bruno releasing Rice. But Arsenal must be careful. Freedom without structure becomes chaos. If Rice goes higher, somebody still has to protect transitions, somebody still has to control the center, and somebody still has to stop the midfield becoming stretched. So Bruno could unlock Rice, but only if the balance behind that freedom is real. But Rice is only half of the equation, because Bruno would also change the pressure on Ødegaard. Ødegaard often becomes Arsenal's safest route when the midfield needs control. He drops towards the ball, creates an angle, helps Arsenal escape pressure, then has to move forward again and provide the final action. Bruno could reduce that cycle. He could take more responsibility for progression. He could give Arsenal control without dragging Ødegaard away from the final third so often. That sounds ideal. But there is also a risk of duplication. Bruno likes involvement. Ødegaard likes involvement. Both want touches. Both help dictate rhythm. If Arsenal do not define the zones properly, they could add another excellent midfielder who moves towards the ball, when the attack still needs more players moving beyond it. That is why this signing cannot be judged only by names. The roles must fit together. And now we reach the price. Newcastle do not want to sell their captain. Reports place their valuation above £80 million, so Arsenal cannot treat this like a low-risk opportunity. At that price, Bruno has to change the midfield. He has to reduce dependence. He has to create clearer roles. He has to help Rice become more dangerous. He has to keep Ødegaard closer to the areas where Arsenal need creativity. And he has to improve Arsenal's ability to escape pressure. Anything less is not enough, because Arsenal would not simply be buying another starter. They would be spending elite money to redesign the center of the team. That is why the question is not, is Bruno good? He clearly is. The question is, does Bruno solve enough of Arsenal's midfield problems to justify what Newcastle would demand? That is a much harder case. There is also a serious counter-argument. Arsenal may not need Bruno at all. Rice can play deeper. Ødegaard can control matches. Arsenal already have technical midfield options, and more than £80 million could be used elsewhere, on a left-sided attacker, on another defender, on squad depth, or on a different midfielder with a more specialized profile. That argument deserves respect, because Bruno is not the only possible solution, and expensive versatility can sometimes hide the absence of one clear elite function. But Arsenal also have to consider the cost of doing nothing. If Rice continues carrying too many phases, if Ødegaard keeps dropping away from the final third, if one press can disrupt Arsenal's entire midfield rhythm, then the risk remains. So this is not a case of Bruno or failure. It is a case of whether Bruno is the clearest answer to a problem Arsenal genuinely have. So what would success actually look like? Not Bruno simply starting every match, not Arsenal winning the announcement, not another expensive name in the squad. Success would look like role clarity, Bruno taking responsibility in the earlier phases, Rice attacking higher and more aggressively, Ødegaard staying closer to the final third, Arsenal escaping pressure without panicking, and the midfield protecting transitions without losing attacking threat. That is the version worth paying for. 3 elite midfielders, 3 clearer jobs, one structure that does not collapse when one player is pressed or absent, because Arsenal's biggest midfield risk is not a lack of talent, it is concentration of responsibility, too much control on Ødegaard, too much physical burden on Rice, too few alternative routes when the match becomes difficult. Bruno only solves the case if he spreads that responsibility properly. So here is the verdict. Bruno Guimarães could solve Arsenal's biggest midfield risk, but that risk is not a shortage of quality, it is the concentration of responsibility. Rice is asked to protect, carry, press, recover, and attack. Ødegaard is asked to control, connect, create, and provide the final action. Bruno could redistribute that burden. He could give Arsenal another route through pressure. He could release Rice into more aggressive areas. He could keep Ødegaard closer to the final third, and he could make Arsenal's midfield less dependent on the same 2 players solving every phase. But at more than £80 million, possibility is not enough. The roles have to become clearer. The transitions have to remain protected, and Arsenal must avoid creating duplication instead of balance. So the ruling is simple. Bruno is not worth elite money merely because he is an elite player. He is worth it only if his arrival makes Rice more dangerous, Ødegaard more focused, and Arsenal's midfield harder to disrupt. If he does that, he is not another signing. He is the player who redistributes the entire structure. Case closed. If you want Arsenal analysis that looks past the transfer headline and follows the evidence, this is exactly what Casefile is built for. The next case is already open.